Imagine pouring your heart and soul into a company for 8 long years, early mornings, late nights, missed holidays, skipped birthdays, only to be discarded like yesterday's news. No warning, no gratitude, just a cold smile and 6 words. Your services are no longer needed. That's exactly what happened to me. But what they didn't know was that I had a surprise waiting for them, one that would turn their world upside down. My name is Tessa Monroe, and this is the story of how they tried to erase me and how I made sure the world would never forget me instead. 8 years. That's how long I gave to Ashbridge Solutions. 8 years of showing up before the sun peeked over the horizon, my coffee cooling on my desk as I debugged code into the early hours. 8 years of missing my niece's first steps, my mom's birthday dinners, and quiet weekends with friends, all because I believed in what we were building. I wasn't just an employee there. I was their top systems architect, the one they called when the servers crashed, when the data pipelines clogged, when everything was on fire. And somehow, I always found a way to put the flames out. I didn't do it for the paycheck or the pat on the back. I did it because I loved the work, because I saw the potential in every line of code I wrote. But on a cloudy Wednesday afternoon, all of that came crashing down. I was sitting at my desk, surrounded by the familiar hum of the development lab, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I reviewed the latest integration reports for Nexus Core. It was an AI-driven operations platform I designed from the ground up, my pride, my legacy. Months of sleepless nights had gone into it, fine-tuning every algorithm, every failsafe until it was perfect, stable, smart, and just days away from its big debut at an investor launch. I could already picture the looks on their faces when they saw what it could do, how it could revolutionize the industry. Then, at 3:15 p.m., an email popped up on my screen. No subject line, just urgent, meeting with Charles and HR. My stomach dropped. Charles was the CEO, a man who wore tailored suits and a perpetual smirk, the kind of guy who thought charm could cover a lack of substance. I'd never trusted him, but I'd never thought he'd pull something like this. I grabbed my laptop and walked down the glass hallway, my reflection flickering in the polished panes. To my left, the lab buzzed softly. My servers, the ones I'd spent years configuring, whirring away like a heartbeat. To my right, framed photos of company milestones hung proudly. Charles shaking hands, Charles cutting ribbons, Charles grinning at every turn. Not a single one showed me, even though I'd been there for every late-night fix, every breakthrough, every quiet victory. I stepped into the conference room, and there he was, Charles, sitting at the head of the table, fingers steepled like some cartoon villain. His eyes gleamed with a smugness that made my skin crawl. Beside him, Margaret from HR stared at the table, avoiding my gaze like I was already a ghost. "Tessa," Charles began, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "We appreciate everything you've contributed, but we've decided to take the company in a new direction. Effective immediately, your role is being dissolved." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. 8 years, and that's all I got. A scripted line wrapped in corporate jargon. No warning, no thank you, just betrayal dressed up as business. I could feel my pulse racing, but I kept my face still. I'd learned a long time ago that silence cuts deeper than shouting. "Of course," I said, my voice steady. "Would you like my laptop now?" Margaret blinked, caught off guard by my calm. Charles just nodded, satisfied like he'd already won. That would be ideal. I set the laptop gently on the table and stood, my movements deliberate. 2 security guards were already waiting outside the door, their faces blank as they flanked me. I turned to Charles one last time. "Good luck with the investor meeting tomorrow," I said, letting a small smile tug at my lips. "Without me." He raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "We'll manage." I smiled wider. "Let's hope so." The elevator doors slid shut, and as Charles faded from view behind the brushed steel, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet, but a quiet certainty. The countdown had begun. System failure in 9 minutes. See, what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that Nexus Core had a failsafe built deep into its core, a little gift I'd left myself. It wasn't sabotage, it was insurance. It would only trigger if my credentials were removed from the system, a final line of defense to protect what I'd created. Because I'd learned the hard way that the real threats don't come from hackers or competitors. They come from the people sitting across the table, smiling as they stab you in the back. 6 months earlier, I'd started noticing strange things. Server pings in the dead of night when no one should have been logged in, files being copied, logs subtly altered. I traced them back to an account tied to Charles's executive assistant, Rachel. At first, I thought it was a glitch, but the pattern kept repeating, like someone was testing the locks on a door they planned to break through. I didn't say a word to anyone. Instead, I got to work, building an invisible security shell around Nexus Core, layers of code so intricate, so personal that no one else could even see them, let alone unravel them. It wasn't about revenge then. It was about protecting what was mine. I'd embedded a simple logic into the system. Trust must be earned. Credentials can be revoked. Loyalty can't be faked. They thought they were cutting me out, but they were cutting out the only person who truly understood how Nexus Core breathed. As I walked out of the building that day, carrying a cardboard box with a few photos, a potted succulent, and a USB drive that held more power than they could imagine, I wasn't furious. I wasn't even surprised. Betrayal stings less when you've seen the shadows moving ahead of time. Outside, the sky had turned a bruised gray, heavy with the promise of rain. Upstairs, they were probably clinking glasses, celebrating their short-lived victory. But down here, in the quiet of the parking lot, 9 minutes ticked by like a heartbeat. At minute 1, the system logged a critical authentication error, my credentials vanishing like a snapped wire. By minute 3, internal processes started looping, confused without their anchor. At minute 6, the dashboard lit up with red warning boxes, anomalies piling up like a traffic jam. Nexus Core's AI flagged every subsystem as unstable, screaming for attention. And by minute 9, it all came down. Not just a crash, but a full-on meltdown, the kind that makes even the cockiest ET leads sweat through their hoodies. The investors were set to see the demo the next morning, but now the system was a mess of broken code and frozen screens, with no obvious way to fix it. I could picture Charles up there, his smirk slipping as the realization hit. How his illusion of control shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. But I wasn't there to watch it unfold. I was at home, curled up on my couch in my tiny apartment, sipping chamomile tea like it was any other evening. The TV flickered with some reality dating show I didn't care about, the sound a soft hum in the background as I stared at my phone. Nothing yet, just the quiet before the storm. Then, at 5:12 p.m., it rang, an unknown number. I knew who it was before I picked up. "Tessa, it's me," came a rushed voice. Eli, the lead systems engineer, one of the few people at Ashbridge I actually liked. "You didn't hear this from me, but the system's down, completely. Charles is losing it. They think it's sabotage." I smiled into the phone. "And what do you think, Eli?" He paused, then chuckled softly. "I think you built something too smart to be tossed aside like that. And I think Charles is finally figuring out what happens when you burn the person holding it all together." He lowered his voice. "They're gonna call you. They need you." He was right. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Rachel, Charles's assistant, her voice tight and formal. "Charles would like to speak with you. It's urgent. A car's coming to pick you up within the hour." I almost laughed. "Tell him I'm busy," I said coolly. "Maybe tomorrow." A long pause. "Tessa, please." That please was everything. It wasn't just desperation. It was fear. Nexus Core wasn't just a product to them. It was the backbone of their investor pitch, their valuation, their whole shiny future. And now it was a smoking wreck. I stood and crossed my apartment, the hardwood cool under my socks, and opened a small desk drawer. Inside was a sleek black USB drive, nothing fancy, just a tiny piece of plastic that held the key to their salvation. Not sabotage, but stability. See, Nexus Core wasn't like other software. I'd built it with ethical protocols, a dynamic intelligence that adapted, but only under trusted guidance. When they yanked me out, they tripped a breach of trust, and the AI did what I'd programmed it to do: lock itself down, protect its core. By 7 o'clock p.m., Charles called himself. "Tessa," he said, forcing calm into his voice. We've had an unexpected hiccup. Some kind of authentication bug, I think. A bug? I echoed, playing along. Yeah. We'd like your help fixing it. I let the silence hang for a moment. Is this a freelance gig, or am I back on payroll? He sighed, the sound heavy with defeat. We can talk about that when you're here. I made him wait another hour before I agreed to show up. When I walked into Ashbridge headquarters, the place was a war zone, engineers darting between cubicles, monitors flashing red alerts, the air thick with panic. Charles met me in the executive boardroom, his tie loose, hair a mess. He looked like a man who'd lost everything but didn't realize I was the only reason he still had a chance. Can you fix it? He asked, his voice tight. I pulled the USB from my coat pocket and set it on the mahogany table with a soft click. I can, I said, but we need to talk first. His eyes narrowed. You think you're in a position to negotiate? I leaned forward, meeting his gaze. I know I am. The power had shifted and he knew it. I wasn't just the woman they'd fired. I was the key to the thing they'd bet their entire future on, and I wasn't giving it back for nothing. Charles stared at the USB like it might bite him. This fixes it? He asked, his voice strained. I let the silence stretch, watching his foot tap under the table, his jaw clench. It's the protocol update, I said finally. The system's working as designed, but it doesn't recognize you, or anyone here, as a trusted authority anymore. He scoffed. That's ridiculous. We own it. We paid for it. I gave a small, dry laugh. You paid for a product. You didn't pay for understanding, and you definitely didn't pay for loyalty. His face flushed, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. I stood and walked to the window, the city skyline sprawling out below, lights twinkling like stars, Ashbridge's glass tower looking invincible from the outside. But I knew how shaky it really was. I gave you 8 years, I said quietly, my breath fogging the glass. Late nights, weekends, everything I had. And you threw me out like I was trash. No warning, no meeting, not even a thank you. He stayed silent. I turned to face him. You didn't just fire me. You cut out the person who built your whole infrastructure without even a conversation. Now the system you wanted to show off doesn't trust you. How do you think that looks, Charles? He flinched, just enough to tell me he got it. What do you want? He muttered. There it was, the moment I'd been waiting for. Full recognition as Nexus Corps' lead architect, I said, my voice steady. My name on every document, every patent, every press release. You try to make me a ghost again, and I'll make your system disappear. Fair trade. He swallowed hard. What else? 25% equity in the platform, retroactively vested. And a board seat. His eyes widened. You're insane. The board won't. They will if they want investors tomorrow, I cut in. Without this update, you've got no demo, just a very expensive failure. He leaned back, exhaling like he was trying to keep his temper in check. For a moment, he just stared at me, calculating. You planned this, he said, his voice low. You set us up. No, I replied. I protected what I built. Another pause, then a slow nod. I'll need it in writing, I added. You'll have it by morning, he grumbled. No, I said firmly. Tonight, before I hand over anything. His eyes sharpened. You don't trust me? I smiled. You fired me. We locked eyes across the table, a silent standoff. Finally, he stood and waved at Rachel, who'd been hovering outside. Call legal. Now. It took 3 hours. Drafts flying back and forth, my attorney on speed dial, edits piling up. When Charles tried to slip my equity down to 20% in the 3rd version, I didn't even blink. I just stood, picked up the USB, and headed for the door. If it's not exactly what we agreed, I said, hand on the knob, the system stays down, and so does your company. Rachel handed me the corrected papers 5 minutes later. With the contract signed and binding, I slid the USB back across the table. This restores trust protocols and full function, I said. But it also sets up an oversight loop. Every admin change reports to me. Try to sideline me again, and Nexus Corps will know. Charles eyed the drive like it was a coiled snake, but he nodded. Understood, he whispered. I turned to leave, my heels clicking on the marble floor. Just before the elevator, he called out, "Tessa!" I paused. "You could have burned us down." "Why didn't you?" I glanced back. "Because I didn't build Nexus Core to destroy things. I built it to protect them, including me." The doors closed, and this time I wasn't leaving in shame. I was rising. The next morning, I walked back into Ashbridge through the front door. No visitor badge, no escorts, just a signed agreement and a digital trail of my reinstatement. People glanced up from their desks, some shocked, some wary, some relieved. Eli met me near the dev pit, his grin saying it all. "You really did it," he whispered. "I'm not here for revenge," I told him. "I'm here to make sure no one touches Nexus Core without knowing what it is." But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Part of me did want revenge, not in chaos, but in being seen, in finally mattering after 8 years of fading into the background. Charles avoided my eyes during the investor demo. He rattled off the usual buzzwords: automation, security, intelligence. But when he introduced Nexus Core, his voice tightened. "And now, I'd like to present the system's original architect, our co-lead developer and strategic advisor, Tessa Monroe." There it was, my name, my title, my validation. The investors turned to me as I stepped forward. "Good morning," I said, my voice clear. "This isn't just a platform. It's a system that thinks, adapts, and protects, not just from outside threats, but from inside ones too. Nexus Core doesn't react, it predicts, and it remembers who built it." A few eyebrows went up at that. I didn't care. I wasn't here to play nice. The demo was flawless. 5 simulated threats neutralized in real time, no hiccups, no delays. The room buzzed with excitement afterward, investors swarming Charles with numbers and me with questions about scale and partnerships. For once, they saw me, not just the company, but the mind behind it. Later, Charles called me into his office. "You made an impression," he said, not looking up from his screen. "I wasn't trying to impress," I replied. "I was doing my job." He met my eyes then, tired but sharp. "Some board members think we should keep you involved officially." "And you?" I asked. "I think you're dangerous," he said flatly. "But necessary." I smiled. "You should have figured that out years ago." The weeks after were messy. Whispers in the halls, sidelong glances. People unsure if I'd blackmailed my way back. I didn't need their trust, though. Just access, oversight. Proof I belonged. One afternoon, I was combing through audit logs when I spotted something odd. Multiple access attempts from restricted accounts, all from finance, days after I'd returned. I dug deeper. Partial downloads of Nexus Core's source code, encrypted and fragmented, but mine. I marched into Charles's office the next morning, dropping the log printout on his desk. "Why's your finance team trying to duplicate my files?" He barely glanced at it. "I don't know. I'll check." "No," I said, voice low. "I will." That night, Nexus Core pinged me with a high-level alert. Internal breach. Risk critical. Someone was cloning the platform, quietly, carefully, planning to spin it off without my name. Charles had brought me back, but someone still wanted me gone. This time, I wouldn't just defend myself. I'd defend everything I'd built, and I wouldn't do it alone. I set a digital trap, a bait line of code, useless but tempting, buried in a documentation packet. At 2:41 a.m. Friday, it triggered. The credentials? Rachel's. The same Rachel who'd begged me to come back, who smiled at me daily like nothing was wrong. Now I saw that smile for what it was, a mask. I pulled her access logs, 40 unauthorized code pulls in 6 weeks, masked downloads, 2 transfers to an unlisted domain. That domain? Ashbridge Ventures, a shell company Charles had set up 3 months earlier, with him as majority shareholder and Rachel as co-founder. They weren't just sidelining me, they were stealing Nexus Core, planning to strip my name and sell a clone while the original kept them afloat, but they forgot I'd built it to fight back. That night, I flipped the second protection switch, a kill switch in the authentication layer. It didn't destroy, it deceived. Every unauthorized access got flooded with fake data, useless algorithms, scrambled histories, decoy prototypes. To them, it'd look like gold. In reality, it was ash. The next morning, Charles called me in, pale and tense. He shoved a tablet at me. Corrupted code, a mess of broken strings. This is from our backup, he said. It's scrambled. Looks like someone accessed it without clearance, I said evenly. Nexus Core fights unauthorized duplication. He stood, furious. Tessa, if you've sabotaged— I haven't, I cut in. It's doing what I designed it to do, protect itself, even from you. His eyes burned with anger. If I said this went too far, that investors were promised a new version under a new entity, I tilted my head. I'd say you've got a rough board meeting coming. You don't win this, he hissed. I smiled. I already did. You just haven't read the code. I walked out, leaving him to stew in his crumbling empire. 3 days later, I called an emergency board meeting, sending them everything: logs, alerts, transfer records, proof of Ashbridge Ventures. The truth didn't need embellishing. Charles showed up late, looking like he hadn't slept. Rachel didn't show. The board sat in silence as they read. Then Evelyn Sharp, the chairwoman, fixed Charles with a stare. Do you deny this? Rachel acted alone, he rasped. I leaned in. Charles owns Ashbridge Ventures. Rachel's his co-founder. Her account, his plan. Silence. Evelyn turned to me. Nexus Core's operational? Yes, I said. The original's secure. The clone's trashed with decoys, unfixable. It's under my oversight now. And it can't be stolen again? Another asked. Not without my biometrics. I'll add independent verification if you want, but it protects itself. Legally and technically. Evelyn closed the folder. Time for a change. The vote was unanimous. Charles was out as CEO within the hour. Rachel was fired retroactively. The shell company dissolved. They named me interim CTO with control over Nexus Core's future. But the real win wasn't the title. It was knowing I didn't have to prove myself anymore. It was written, signed, real. I spent weeks rebuilding trust, talking to engineers, the product team, even legal, who finally knew my name. The investor launch went off perfectly. 5 contracts in 2 weeks, including a healthcare giant desperate for security. On stage at the reveal, I wasn't a shadow anymore. I was the face. As applause filled the room, my smartwatch buzzed. System secure. Threats neutralized. Integrity restored. Nexus Core wasn't just my work, it was my shield. In the months after, I made sure every update carried my principles: ethics, ownership, transparency. We built systems that were smart and safe, not just from hackers, but from greed and betrayal. One day, a young developer, Mariah, stopped by my office, nervous but curious. How'd you know when to fight? She asked. I didn't always, I admitted, but I learned to protect my work, not my ego. When someone tries to take what you built because they can, not because they get it, that's when you push back. She nodded, soaking it in. Protect what you build, I added. Code, ideas, peace, not because they'll steal it, but because you'll be ready when they try. So what would you do if someone tried to erase your name from your own creation? Walk away or make them remember? Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's standing up, reclaiming your space, and letting your work speak. Integrity can't be taken. It can only be guarded. If this story hit home, please like, share, and subscribe. Drop a comment. Have you ever had your work undervalued or stolen? How'd you handle it? Let's talk, support each other, and protect what we build. Thanks for watching. Your work matters. Guard it.